Review might not be the right word for this particular work. I'll talk about the game, sure, I'll tell you my feelings on its various facets, but that's not why I've made this video. It struck me one day that the sheer amount of excited bollocks I can talk about this game is higher than most titles I can mention. That said, it's been with me for about 15 years now, so I don't know why I'm surprised, but I've never played anything quite like Uplink. It's a video game about hacking, an indie game, the debut of Introversion Software, and so much more. I've played others like it, but it's never quite the same. 2 words describe Uplink in a beautifully succinct manner: Hollywood hacking. That is the way hacking is portrayed in the movies, the 101 class in how to make hacking look cool to people who've heard the term and little more. Although granted, it's more interesting to look at than a bunch of command line windows. Even the term hacking has a multitude of definitions, so we might as well define ours right now. Hacking, as I'll refer to it here, is the act of gaining unauthorized access to a computer system. Hollywood hacking might give you lip service to real-life hacking techniques, culture, and history, but that's all it is, lip service. It's no more a guide to hacking than this is. It's like when, say, you hear an over-the-top caricature of an Irish accent. It's done that way because the only information the speaker wishes to get across is that the accent is Irish. So they do it in the most obvious and over-the-top way possible, erasing all doubt as to what it's meant to be, but leaving any kind of accuracy or sensitivity to stereotypes by the wayside. And that's what Hollywood hacking is to real-life hacking. For an actual example of the term in use, well, whilst it's not even the first example of its kind, and it's actually a lot more realistic than some people give it credit for, the movie Hackers is what I always think of when Hollywood hacking comes up. Real-life terms are used and references are made, but the actual act of hacking in this film is still primarily a pile of CG nonsense. And that's the template Uplink builds on, making hacking look and feel cool without too much concern for, facts. So realistic Uplink is not. Will you feel like a master hacker with the entire world at your fingertips just waiting to be cracked open by your command? Yes you will. To me, the game is built upon 3 pillars: immersion, freedom, and feedback. We'll get into those as we go along, but first let's start this up and see what's there. The game opens with you connecting to the servers of the Uplink Corporation. And if you've never played before, the game literally starts with this, no main menu or anything. It should become pretty obvious as time goes on, but they're quite keen on having this immersive experience, as if you're using the Uplink operating system or something, up to and including a perfectly pointless password entry when you register a new user. You can log yourself into any of those profiles without ever touching the keyboard, it's pointless. That's where the immersion pillar comes in, barely anything to remind you that the outside world exists in order to sell the experience even more. Thankfully, in this case, they don't make you remember and type out the actual password. That would have been a step over the line. Once registered, you're dropped into the world of Uplink and the fun begins. If you know what you're doing. If you don't, there's a tutorial available, but I've barely even told you the premise yet, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. What you've just done is register as an agent of Uplink Corporation. They provide the means for you to take on work as a freelance computer hacker. They cover everything from providing the gateway machine to which you've connected, to hooking you up with clients, to denying your very existence if you get caught. Basically, Uplink Corporation is to hacking what the Pirate Bay is to illegal downloads, facilitators rather than direct suppliers. All for a mere 300 credits a month, which is kind of a bargain considering that the lowest tier jobs will cover that cost for 3 months. So best learn what you're doing and get to it. The tutorial takes you through the very basics with a simple, risk-free job. It has you buy some software, break into a training machine, copy a file and get back out again before you're traced. Not to worry if you are traced here, all you get is a snarky email from Uplink Corp themselves politely suggesting you don't screw up next time. Once the tutorial is out of the way, you can crack on with your freelance hacking habit. Just remember to delete that copied file and the tutorial from your gateway machine first, it's taking up valuable space. For me, that shows some real dedication to maintaining the immersion. Where are these tutorial messages coming from, a nitpicker might say? Well, every new account is issued with a gateway machine, a company-supplied computer which you connect to and operate remotely. It carries out the grunt work of your hacking and acts as your shield against the real world, a bit like a customizable burner phone, or those game streaming services that keep popping up and failing. If you do mess up and the feds come calling, Trail ends there at that anonymous computer. And since everyone gets one of these gateways when they sign up, they might as well stick a tutorial program on there so you'll know how to use the damn thing. So there's your answer to how would these tutorial messages appear. A program installed on the gateway itself, of course. I'm probably harping on about this way too much, and Christ knows it's not going to be the last time, but I'm kind of in love with this immersion building, yet entirely, ultimately pointless detail. The damn thing even takes up space on your gateway unless you delete it. Jeez. Anyway, tutorial done or skipped, your next stop is the Uplink Internal Services machine. This is kind of like your main hub. It's where you get jobs, new software, new hardware for your gateway machine, and also where you read up on recent events. Right now, we need work, so into the handy dandy message board we go. There's all manner of different jobs to take from a plethora of clients. Except that being the lowly noob you are, most of them are out of your reach. If you've got no experience on your CV, you're not going to be considered for a CEO position, are you? Once you've picked out a suitable job, you can accept it as is, and the details will be emailed to you. Or you can get in contact with the client, anonymously, of course, to ask some questions about how secure the target is or negotiate your payment. Agents with a higher reputation can ask to be paid more or even get as much as the full payment up front. Most of the time you'll get told no, especially early doors, but it never hurts to ask. I mean, literally, there's no consequence for asking, so for the sake of a few clicks, you might as well do it every time. An advance on your pay might be just what you need for that fancy new upgrade after all. But more on those later. We have a job that needs doing. The jobs you've taken on are indicated by a special icon in the emails list. There's no time limit to these regular jobs, and you can accept more than will actually fit on your screen. You simply turn them in once you're done. Very useful if a target computer turns out to have more security than expected, and you need to back off and regroup. We'll take one of the basic missions as an example. Jack into a server and delete a file. No hacker worth their salt would connect directly, of course, they'll trace you like that. As soon as they realise someone's in there who isn't meant to be, like someone who's brute forcing a login password for example, they'll want to find out who. Which is where this big map boy comes in. It lets you bounce your connection across the entire globe. The more you bounce, the longer it'll take for you to be traced as they travel from computer to computer trying to find the source of the hack. You won't have many locations saved at the moment, but there's enough to get started. Bear in mind that each stop doesn't buy you that much time on its own. That is, unless you have an administrator account on there. They slow the trace down much more. Given that we'll need admin privileges to do most of our jobs anyway, let's see how that's done. When you connect to a server, you'll most likely be presented with a login screen. All you have to do is go into your programs, find the password breaker, click on that, then click on the password field. Give the program time to do its thing, and once the thing is done, you log in. Jump into the file system, find the one file you need to delete, fetch the file deleter from your programs list and drop it on the target, wait for the program to finish its job and disconnect. Then you can reply to the mission email and claim your reward. And yes, I'm afraid using programs in this game is going to be this fiddly every time. I'll get into that later. Now, that's the Cliff Notes version of pulling off a job, but it's all you really need to concern yourself with at the start. The complexity of this game serves as both a good reason to play it as well as a large barrier to entry, so it makes sense for the early jobs to be a bit more forgiving in that regard. For example, most servers will maintain log files of who connected to them and from where. Later on, you can get caught if the company whose computer you hacked into decides to follow that paper trail. Even if you disconnected before you were traced, those logs were written as soon as you connected, and that's all they need to take that next step towards catching you. Just to ramp up the tension even more, getting traced isn't an instant game over. It takes a certain amount of game time for the feds to mobilise and seize your gateway machine. And that's another thing I really need to mention. The game has non-optional permadeath. It's a fate easily avoided if you remember to cover your tracks, but one slip up can send you back to square one. Your gateway seized, your account closed, and your progress lost. With Uplink Corporation denying all knowledge of your deeds, obviously. They just supplied a remote computer, ain't their business what you did with it. That serves two purposes though. The company avoids liability whilst also leaving you free to create a new account and start from scratch. I mean, if somebody uses a hired car as a getaway vehicle, you don't arrest the people at the hire company, do you? Although that analogy kind of breaks the Pirate Bay comparison, so never mind. But how will I know if I'm being traced, you may reasonably ask? Well, that depends on whether you've remembered to run your trace tracker. This program tells you how long you have before you get traced and forcibly kicked off a server, both visually and with audio. The beeps increase in frequency as your time runs out. If you don't disconnect and cover your tracks before that happens, it could end your game. And those beeps are a potent way of building your anxiety, let me tell you. It's the same principle that made the motion tracker from Aliens as terrifying as it was. There's also a HUD upgrade you can buy later on, which shows the position of the trace on the map, which trades the knowledge of how long a trace has left for the knowledge of which server you need to wipe the logs from in order to make the trail run cold. Not much point in wiping the logs if they've already tracked you past that point, after all. Anyway, there's no point in buying this thanks to a server called InterNIC, which is a pain in the arse to pronounce, so I'm just going to call it Internic from now on. This is essentially the phone book for all but a few servers in the Uplink universe. However, for most players it also has a secondary use. If you always use Internic as the first node in your connection and disconnect before the trace finishes, you'll only ever have to wipe its logs to avoid getting caught. Plus it has an admin login which never expires, very useful for increasing your trace times. Honestly, it's kind of game breaking. I suppose you would just end up using a different random server as your starting point if this weren't an option, but Internic is essentially a phone book. Why does it need an admin login, and why is that interface publicly accessible? It's almost as if that was the developer's intention now I think about it. By this point in the game, you may have noticed how slow everything is or how little data your gateway machine can store. Those agonising seconds it takes to crack passwords or simply delete files is getting to be a bit torturous, and those massive data heist missions are well out of your reach without multiple trips. Hell, you might not even have room for all the programs you've bought. That's because your gateway machine is bog standard hardware. Makes sense though, if they're giving these away for free with every new account, they're not exactly going to be top of the line. You start off with a beat up, run down, run of the mill 60 GHz CPU? Yeah, we had a different idea of where hardware was gonna go back in the 2000s, and it didn't involve no multicore. The game barely even acknowledges Wi-Fi, I think. Funnily enough, the game itself is set in 2010, 9 years in the future at launch, but we actually crossed that line quite a while back. Anyway, your starting gateway machine is the most basic of bitches, and that one CPU can only do so much at once. It has to split its power between everything that's running. You can adjust how much of the CPU each program gets, but eventually it's not enough. If you want to do those higher level jobs, you'll need to upgrade. There are two routes for upgrading, the machine itself and the components within. Let's look at the components first by focusing on the various slots a machine will give you. Upgrading your CPU will let you run more programs faster, memory for storing more programs and data, which means it's really hard disk space, but never mind, I've seen companies who specialise in selling phones make that mistake. Modem for faster transfer of data to and from faraway places, and then there's security, which is hard to summarise quickly, so I'll do that later. There's also the possibility of upgrading the gateway itself to increase your component upgrade options. Easiest way to think about it is that the gateway is a big box with slots in it, and each slot takes a certain type of component. You put better components into the slots and the box works better. And multiple components work in tandem too. For example, your starting gateway has one CPU slot. Another more expensive gateway might have two. If you buy two CPUs for that gateway, you get the benefit of both for all your number crunching needs. It just adds the two speeds from each CPU and that's your total CPU power. Some gateways are incremental improvements, more of the same but better, and some are for a particular niche. For example, there's this model with all the CPU slots, useful for cracking codes at blinding speed. Or this one with all the memory slots, perfect for copying all the data off a corporate mainframe. And then there's the security modules, which come in two forms, the motion sensor and the self-destruct. Sounds a little over the top, but bear with me here. Remember when I said that getting traced could result in the feds coming to seize your gateway computer? Well, if they do that, then all they'll find is anonymous account information. This isn't traceable back to you personally, of course, but that account will be closed with all the money and reputation it accrued lost. What if the feds don't get that machine though? What if they turn up and find nothing but a lump of dead metal? That's what the self-destruct does. Destroy your gateway machine and everything on it. Not ideal, sure, but that means the feds don't get any information and the account remains open. So long as you have the funds, you'll be able to log back in, buy a new gateway machine, and pick up more or less where you left off. The self-destruct doesn't activate automatically though, you have to pull the trigger. How do you know when to do that? With the motion sensor. It lights up whenever somebody is near your gateway. In yet another nod to Immersion, those somebodies include not only the feds but the Uplink technicians coming to install upgrades. So don't order any new hardware before attempting a high risk job, you might blow up your gateway over nothing. Hell, depending on the self-destruct method Uplink use, you might take the technicians out of the machine. Anyway, that's the other reason why getting traced doesn't instantly end your game. Not only do the feds need a realistic amount of time to mobilise and grab your gateway, it also gives you time to hit the kill switch, if you have one. Or perhaps more accurately, argue with yourself over whether you actually need to hit the kill switch or not. Maybe the trace didn't go through. Maybe you deleted that one log just in time. Remember though, this decision is the difference between losing your equipment and losing everything. And that everything isn't just your hardware or money, it's your reputation, which comes in two different forms, your ranking and your Neuromancer rating. Ranking is increased by completing jobs and pulling off risky exploits, and can be lowered by abandoning jobs you've taken on. It's not good form to bail after the handshake has been made, after all. With a higher ranking, you can take on more difficult jobs. Your Neuromancer rating, obvious reference aside, is more like a karma meter, affected by the types of hacks you choose to do. Destructive hacks like deleting files will bring it down. That's a low-key example, however. Once you get access to one of the big three databases, you can actively ruin people's lives. Or improve them, but that's not the point I'm trying to make here. And the game will punish you for going too far down that road. A low Neuromancer rating will lock you out of some jobs as your reputation precedes you. Remember, the clients have a choice, and they might choose to hold out for someone who's less of a sociopath. It's worth noting that some of the destructive jobs are easier than their non-destructive counterparts. Even the simplest example will show this. Deleting a file is quicker and easier than copying a file, attaching it to an email and sending it off. It can be seen as a trade-off between taking the easier short-term gain path versus the harder long-term gain one. It's not entirely clear exactly how all this information is known to the companies doing the recruiting, whether there's inside information that Uplink Corporation gives to them, or if they looked on the newsfeed and saw that the global criminal database has suffered a breach for the 14th time that month. And to another point, this is what I see as the basic gameplay loop of Uplink. You do something and the game responds. It sounds obvious and something that happens in every game, but it feels a bit more natural and meaningful here. The game reacts to almost everything you do, even if it's only that entry on the newsfeed. For one thing, there's a working stock exchange in there, where you can buy stocks yourself, watch it plummet after the news reports that the company got hacked, and start getting some very evil ideas indeed. I mean, we're already criminals, what's the harm in a little short selling to boot? Point is, I like to think of Uplink as more of a collection of systems working in tandem, closer to a simulator. Most games will wait for a set of conditions to be met before triggering a pre-packaged result, one a developer had to think of and implement. With a few exceptions, Uplink doesn't feel like that. It has much more of a simulation feel, like a change in one system will ripple into the others. Another hacking sim I've played, Hacker Evolution, progresses in a strict linear level structure, and that alone makes Uplink stand out to me. Hacker Evolution is a series of challenges where Uplink gives you a playground. You can do missions which will give you money and ranking, but you never call them side quests or anything like that. They're randomly generated, obviously so, evoking a sense that you're one fish in a deep ocean. An ocean where companies are low-key at war with each other and they'll hire any bellend with the appropriate ranking and karma. Almost as scary as our real ocean, actually. Anyway, there's room to breathe here, to experiment, to poke around random systems and see what's there. If you enjoy the sheer thrill of unauthorized systems access, the game will indulge that whenever you like, instead of continually funneling you back to the mission list. Arguably, the missions are there to prepare you for the main plot, and again, we'll get to that. Do you have to do them? No, you do not. There are limitations, as there are in every piece of software, but there's a lot you can do within those limitations. That said, this can feel a little clinical, with the systems responding the same way to every interaction without taking context into account. However, I think it's close enough that your mind can fill in the gaps without too much effort. You can think of it as, I did this mission for a client, or you can think of it as, I just wiped out a company's entire database, or I literally ruined a man's life by framing him for financial fraud. Given just a little bit of imagination, Uplink will give you stories. Like that one time you wiped out an entire mainframe and pinned the blame on whoever showed up first in the academic database. And to go back to the design for a second, if you were designing an interface which made these things possible, you'd make one as cold and clinical as this, where all the missions are presented in roughly the same way without distinction. The more your hackers think about the jobs they're doing, the more likely they are to grow a conscience and walk away. That's not to say it's all Emergent gameplay. There's a couple of scenarios that were deliberately coded in. After a few happy hours of hacking the planet, making a name for yourself, and hopefully earning enough credits for a cheeky upgrade or two, you might suddenly look at the Uplink internal server and think, hey, that has an admin section. I wonder if I can hack that too. Guess what? You absolutely can. This is what I meant by Uplink feeling like it has very few limitations. Despite the unique interface, this is a server like any other and there's an admin section. Why wouldn't you be able to hack it? Of course, being a special server with that unique interface, you might suspect that you'll find something different to the usual randomly named files that other servers have. And if you can get through all the high-level countermeasures in your way, which you would expect nothing less from a company that specialises in computer hacking, you'll find out that there is, indeed, something unique in there. You can download the names of your fellow Uplink agents. The corp isn't daft, of course, these files are heavily encrypted, but they'll also sell you any level of decryption program you want, so a bit of time and money is all you need. While you're getting the data, you can also grab a program that reads said data once it's decrypted and spits out the real names of active Uplink agents. Conveniently, one data file is always missing, the one with your name in it of course, so you'll never have a complete set. What you do next can demonstrate the set of systems idea I have about this game as well as another exception to it. If you successfully grab the Uplink agent list, and don't get caught in the process, you'll find you weren't the only one interested in that information, and they'll find you. An anonymous email asks you to dump the unencrypted files onto a server, email them back, and they'll pay handsomely. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this will absolutely tank your Neuromancer rating, and you soon find out exactly why. Those agents you essentially doxed all turned up dead. So it was a particular scenario that the developers had to have deliberately added, but once again it has realistic effects on other systems. Then again, top 3, yes! Also worth noting that you can look those people up in the various databases that a player will at this point be familiar with. If you want to give every Uplink agent a degree in butt medicine or something, you can go ahead and do that first. Have the names after all. And that's hardly the worst thing you can do, but more on that later. Look, I know I keep saying that, but there's a lot to talk about here. On the other end of the scale, here's something which seems entirely emergent, but definitely has to have had at least one specific event coded in. There's a certain type of job where you need to trace a financial transaction. This is done by hacking into the target's bank account and looking at their statement for a large sum. You note down the account number and the IP of the bank that sum was sent to, then hack into that bank account to get the name of the recipient. And if that sounds like a lot of work, it's not even the most complex mission in the game. You didn't even need to record anyone's voice for that one. But once that mission is done, you might find that big pile of credits lingering at the back of your mind. Imagine the rig you could put together with that sum. The jobs you'd be able to pull with all that power. Typical, isn't it? NPCs with more money than you could probably ever earn yourself. Here's the thing. You can get that money. It won't be easy, mind you. To pull this off, you need to gain access to the bank account, although you already have the password from tracing the transaction, so that part's pretty trivial. Once in, you need to transfer their money to your own account as you'd expect. Now the hard part. You have to frantically race to cover your tracks with two banks hot on your tail, the target's bank and yours. They both have you in their logs after all, and they are not forgiving. In early missions, companies generally don't bother retaliating for a data breach, but banks always come for you. If a single log or statement entry is left behind, you're sunk, and since the bank statement makes it blatantly obvious where the money went, there's no room for error. Two separate hacks to pull off, one after the other, followed by the fastest log cleanup you'll ever do, and the clock is ticking. But it is possible. There's such a terrible tension after that last step. Money transferred, bank statements altered, logs deleted. You've done all you can, and either way, your fate is now sealed. All that's left to do is hit fast forward and hope you were quick enough. If you were too slow, you'll soon know it. The screen will go black. The immediate shock of this is matched only by the coldness of the message that unfolds, telling you that your gateway has been seized, your account deleted, and your actions disavowed. Everything that account represented, all the work that went into it, gone forever thanks to a flash of greed. Nothing to do but sign up and start again. But if you pull it off, you get an email. Sounds underwhelming, I know, but there's a heady mix at work here. First, you didn't end your game, that's a pretty big relief right there. Second, you just made yourself a boatload of cash in one difficult but relatively quick job. I don't think there's any mission that offers a better money to time ratio, assuming you found a suitably rich target in the first place. And third, you more than likely just shot ahead in the rankings. This is the specific event I think was coded in, despite the rest of it basically being possible through existing systems with minimal tweaks. Makes you think though. Only Uplink Corporation can change your ranking, and if they really have this hands-off approach to the actions of their agents, such that they can disavow all knowledge if said agents get caught hacking, how do they know you pulled this off? Nevertheless, the company acknowledges the size of your metaphorical testicles, and rewards you accordingly with a sly pat on the head. It should speak volumes that I've gotten this far without discussing much of the plot. That's how much you're given with this game. There is a main plot, but it doesn't kick in immediately, and even when it does, you can completely ignore it. Hell, if you're not paying too much attention to the email or news, that might pass you by entirely. This is one of the few gameplay elements which is not emergent. It's heavily scripted, although not without leeway in how it all plays out, and keeping with that immersion factor they're so fond of, is presented as an event which merely happens in this universe. Whether you interject yourself into the proceedings or not, and how exactly you might do so, is up to you. It all begins when our high-ranking Uplink agent issues a warning about ARC, alluding to some shady practices on their part. Some reassurances and platitudes follow from ARC themselves, and even from a fellow agent, but eventually Uplink themselves start warning everybody off ARC. Seems that worry was well founded because an email arrives from the whistleblower themselves, a dead man's switch on a 1-week timer, giving you a lead into what ARC was up to and urging someone, anyone, to uncover the truth. If you do decide to go digging, you won't get very far with the information that the late agent gives you, but you will get ARC's attention, and they have a proposal for you. Accept, and the story begins. ARC send you a file with explicit instructions not to run it on your local computer. This is good advice. In fact, I'll just show you right now to sate your curiosity. There you go, no more gateway. Now make sure you aim very carefully next time you go to open your file deleter, because from now on, one click is all it takes to destroy your gateway. Even the damn self-destruct will ask for confirmation before it goes ahead. As you may have surmised, the file is a virus developed by ARC, and they'd like you to test it out. Simple stuff, hack into server, copy the virus over, nip into the terminal to run it, and down goes the server. Simple as that. This thing works fast too, you'll be disconnected before you know it. The virus is named Revelation, and the reasoning behind that name will become clear over time, if you choose to go down that path. Almost as soon as you accept ARC's initial offer, a company named Ironmore steps in to counter it. Send them the file instead, and that'll set you on a whole other track. Also, ARC will send you a stroppy email because they somehow figure out what you did. Well, if you didn't think they were shady and creepy before, that pretty much seals it. Whichever way you choose to go, you're caught up in an arms race. The ARC developed Revelation, the most potent virus the internet has ever seen, and the Ironmore developed Faith, the chemotherapy to Revelation's cancer. The whole world takes notice before long, with Uplink themselves keeping track of the two programs' individual version numbers, and outbreaks of Revelation being tracked on your map screen by ominous red squares representing infected systems. Ultimately, one of these companies will go down and one of the two programs will prevail. Either path has you infiltrating rival networks, and the endgame is a frantic rush from system to system either to purge or infect. One path saving the internet, the other destroying it. It's amazing to me how the game can ramp up the tension with the bare minimum of changes to its systems. All they add for the endgame are a new menu item on the Uplink internal services machine and red squares on the map. For most of the story, nothing will be different. You won't get any new interface signifying a final boss battle, the music won't ramp up as you connect to that last system. It'll be the same as when you started, and yet it'll feel like so much more than that. Again, it fits into my theory of interconnected systems where one change ripples into the others. Some might see this as striving for an immersive, believable experience. Others might surmise that they built the basic gameplay framework of hacking systems and implemented the main story within that framework. I've left out some of the finer details of the story, partially because you may wish to experience it for yourself, but mostly because the plot isn't the main draw for me. I go back to Uplink for the gameplay. And during gameplay, there's a few systems you'll be interacting with quite frequently, beyond your randomly generated file servers. Partly because there's a bunch of missions involving them, partially because they're the most fun. There are these three big databases I mentioned earlier: the Global Criminal Database, the International Academic Database, and the International Social Security Database. Not sure why the criminal one needs to be global instead of international, but anyway. The criminal one has everyone's criminal records, the academic one has everybody's academic records, and the social security one has a bunch of information, but for our purposes it tells you what someone's social status is. Those equate to single, married, or deceased. Remember what I was saying about ruining people's lives? This is where you most need to worry about your Neuromancer rating. The end result is that each database will have two types of job, depending on, frankly, how much of a dick you are. Hacking into the Social Security database will either see you resurrecting an existing identity for someone else to use, or declaring someone legally dead. Questionable as that first one is, it's ultimately the lesser of two evils, if not by much. Access to the International Academic Database will let you improve someone's prospects or bring them down a peg. As for the Global Criminal Database, it's either helping someone find work in spite of a tarnished past, or blotting that record permanently. At least until the next hacker comes along. Honestly, the amount of news reports you see about these big databases getting hacked with no security improvements is kind of ridiculous. By the way, you're not restricted to changing the mission relevant records, or indeed hacking into mission relevant systems. With the exception of a few Easter egg machines, the entire internet is free and open to you. Missions will add the target machine to your server list if it's not already there, but that's not your only source of targets. When I said internet was basically the internet phone book, I meant it. In fact, it's a requirement for some missions. There's these mainframe computers that will only accept a connection from a friendly network node, usually that company's internal machine, and you'll need to go look that IP address up to gain access. Hacking in this game is like swinging your sword or jumping in other games. It might not always be useful to do, but you can always do it. Something extra fun about the Global Criminal Database: if anyone has 2 prior convictions and a charge of violating parole, you can authorize their arrest with the click of a button. The thing is, Uplink doesn't have much of a text parser, so as long as there's 3 entries and one of them contains the word parole, the arrest will go through. This lets one get creative with the supposed crimes your chosen target has committed. You can literally get someone jailed for arson, murder, and jaywalking. And violating parole, I suppose, but that kind of muddies up the reference I was going for. Same deal with any details you have to email back to a client, like how big is this person's bank loan? So long as your reply email contains the correct number somewhere, you could write in the entire Darth Plagueis the Wise speech for all the game cares. The answer is all it's searching for. Not to cast shade on my fellow software development professionals, but this all comes across as a very programmer style of design. Namely, people whose job is not exclusively design. There's a cliche in games development called programmer art, which is usually some MS Paint graphic made by a programmer in 10 seconds as a placeholder. And parts of this game give me that kind of vibe. Interface design is one of those things that, as an end user, you don't really notice unless it's done wrong. It requires a real level of nuance and finesse to get right, a profession all by itself. If you put a programmer in charge of interface design, you're more likely to get the first thing that worked. Again, not casting shade, design is a whole department unto itself, and it is not our department. We didn't train for this. In the case of Uplink, the design tends towards that very programmer-made feel, but I'm not sure it's always a downside. For example, in another game you might have a clearly defined and easily accessible mission list. Hit a button, here's the things you need to do. Simple and easy. Uplink dumps everything into your email, quests and messages alike. The mission messages have a different icon, yes, but they're all in the same place in whatever order you got them. The possibility that the game's design is just a bit clunky does spring to mind, but bear with me. For one thing, game interfaces had just about clawed their way up to usable by 2001. Elegance was still a few years off. I mean, the fact that you need to dig through menus to delete a file is ludicrous nowadays, indefensible. That's about 5 clicks on its own, which is at least 3 clicks too many. Ludicrous clicks aside, The lack of a mission log comes back to that simulation aspect, the feeling of this being your workstation. There's no handy to-do app, you'll have to dig through your emails for the one you want. The idea that this is in-universe might come a bit unstuck if you were to add that mission log. On the other hand, if you let your emails stack up, they'll literally go off the screen, forcing you to delete some of the older ones just to access your latest job. So in terms of this aspect being a positive or negative, it kinda goes both ways. By the way, if you've been watching this and thinking the footage looks a bit fuzzy or pixelated, probably because I had to run the game at 720p resolution just so I could read anything. The UI doesn't scale at all. Not an uncommon artifact from games of the time, but worth noting if you decide to dive in today. There's one more part of this game I haven't talked about, which doesn't fit in with any of the immersion or simulation talk, but nonetheless needs to be talked about. And that's the music. Created by a variety of composers in a variety of trackers, a format long out of fashion by this point, these tracks fit with everything else perfectly. Now, I'm not suggesting your gateway computer would be pumping these tunes out. Lords know it needs the CPU power elsewhere. So it's not a part of the immersion. What the music does do is nail the feel of what's going on. Something about that old school tracker sound seems to evoke the days of the Amiga for me, making the game feel even more nostalgic than it already does. But with higher quality samples, of course. And obviously the soundtrack was going to be electronic, no question about that for a hacking game, flitting between upbeat dance and low-key synth pieces in a way that just seems to match whatever's going on, even if it's clearly just jumping between tracks at random. It's really hard for me to tell which parts of all this were deliberate and which parts I'm making up in my head due to loving the game so much. It should probably be considered a negative point that there's only around 40 minutes of music in the game, but I've barely ever noticed because there's no track that makes you think, oh god, this one again. I could listen to them all day, and in writing this script, I pretty much did. Nails the feel without interfering or drawing too much attention to itself, yet you could listen to it separate from the game. That is a tricky tightrope to walk, just solid work all round. Now, something else after all that praise. If I could only pick one thing to improve about Uplink, it would be the old clunky interface that does tend to get in the way of whatever you're trying to do. Except Uplink OS came out and is exactly that improvement. This was the main problem Uplink faced in the modern age. It is extremely hard to get into if you're used to more modern user interfaces. Ideally, you need someone who's played before to walk you through the first parts of this game and say you'll get used to it when faced with things like clicking 5 goddamn times to delete one goddamn file. Hell, I needed that advice when the game was new. If you're going to play the game today, Uplink OS is the first thing you want to look up. It's such a revelation, pun absolutely intended, sue my balls, a great effort on the part of fans and an indicator of the cult status this game has achieved. This mod came out 15 years after the game it was made for. Even the original developers of Uplink made a video praising it, and more humorously trying to remember how this game they wrote over a decade prior actually works. In fact, Uplink OS is so good that it made going back and getting footage of the original game a lot more of a slog, but them's the breaks. Hard to hate it for being better than something else. So in lieu of wishing for that improvement, I'd go for achievements. It sounds like a dumb suggestion, a waste of a wish if you will, but Uplink is absolutely primed for Chivos. There's the obvious ones you could have, like beating the story missions, reaching the highest Uplink ranking, finding the Easter egg servers, and so on. But I can think of a few more. Pulling off a bank heist, selling the Uplink agent list, getting a senate's worth of people arrested, getting yourself arrested, giving somebody a first class degree in bird law, running the world's most potent virus on your own gateway machine, connecting to the same voice number 15 times in a row until the person on the other end goes mad, bounce a connection across every country, declare a whole continent legally dead. The sheer scope of things you can do in this game makes it ripe for this kind of addition. Alas, it seems that Introversion Software's sights are set elsewhere these days. It's worth noting before I end this that the team behind Uplink was a mere 3 people. That fact alone explains to me why the game is the way it is. The functional, inelegant interface, the interconnecting systems design of gameplay instead of traditional video game tropes, the lack of female headshots in the databases, the fact you could order the game's source code direct from the developers if you wanted. Seriously, the literal blueprints of their one and only sellable product, and they were like, "You want the code, Joe Public? Sure, chuck us a tenner." These are all very indie ideas that barely fit amongst the big titles of the day. Games like Devil May Cry, Max Payne and Halo debuted this year, and Uplink, the company's very first game, was something entirely different from the pack. I can't imagine a big publisher taking the same risk on such a niche genre. Certainly not nowadays where hacking is relegated to minuscule minigames. A simulator without that detached overhead perspective. A game which let you set your own path. Not the first to do that, but early enough that it still stood out. A game which tried to immerse you in the role of a computer hacker before it tried to do anything else. A game which took notice of your actions and made something, anything happen in response. And a game which gave you a bunch of tools in a somewhat functional world with interactive interlinked systems, then let you do whatever you wanted. I may have spent literal weeks worth of time in the lands of Skyrim or the wastelands of Fallout or wherever the hell Terraria is meant to be set, but Uplink is the free, wide open interactive world that still captures my mind. Hey again, thanks for watching all the way to the end. I realise this is a lot longer than my usual fare. What can I say, you get excited about a game, you just want to talk and talk and talk. Anyway, apart from that, it's the obligatory reminder of the subscribe, the like, the dislike buttons, whichever of those you'd like to utilise. And if you really like what I do and are willing and able to support me, I do have a Patreon you can pledge to. Anyway, enough of all that. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.